Have you ever looked into a child's eyes and felt as if they were trying to tell you something? Something you weren't meant to see. In a faded photograph from 1933, a young boy stands beside his mother, smiling politely at the camera. At first glance, it seems like any ordinary family portrait from the Depression era. But when one expert leaned closer, using every tool at her disposal to examine the image, she discovered something that chilled her to the bone. Behind that forced mechanical smile, the boy's eyes reflected a terror that no child should ever know. They held a secret, a fleeting glimpse of something sinister lurking just beyond the frame, something that would remain hidden for nearly 90 years. This is the story of Jonathan Thornbury, a child who disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and of the man who exploited the trust of desperate families during one of America's darkest economic periods. It is a tale of vanished children, a hidden predator, and a photograph that became a silent witness to horrors long forgotten. Until now. A young boy stands beside his mother in a photograph from 1933. Yet when one peers closely into his eyes, a chilling sense of unease seeps through. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a forensic photograph analyst specializing in Depression-era imagery, had attended countless estate sales over the course of her 15-year career. But the decaying Victorian mansion on Elm Street in Salem, Massachusetts, carried a weight of melancholy that seemed to seep into her very soul. The elderly homeowner, Millicent Thornbury, had passed away at the age of 97, leaving behind a house filled with decades of memories, dust-laden furniture, and countless photographs chronicling nearly a century of family history. As Elena carefully sifted through boxes of vintage photographs in the dimly lit attic, her trained eye immediately recognized the exceptional quality of many images from the 1930s and 1940s. Most depicted ordinary family moments, birthday parties, holiday gatherings, summer vacations, but one photograph stopped her cold. It captured a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, standing beside his mother in what appeared to be their backyard during the autumn of 1933, inferred from the clothing styles and photographic techniques. The mother, elegantly clad in a wool coat and colloque hat, typical of the era, smiled warmly at the camera, her hand resting protectively on her son's shoulder. The boy wore knicker suspenders and a crisp white shirt, his dark hair neatly combed and parted. At first glance, the scene seemed like countless other family portraits, a tender, fleeting moment captured for posterity. Yet something about the boy's expression unsettled Elena deeply. His smile appeared forced, almost mechanical, and there was something in his eyes she could not immediately name. Adjusting her high-powered magnifying glass and the antique desk lamp to eliminate shadows, she began to study his face with painstaking precision. What she discovered made her breath catch, her hands trembling. Reflected within the child's pupils, faint yet unmistakable, was an image that defied reason. A figure standing behind the photographer. Someone the boy could see, but who should not have been there. Judging by the photograph's composition and the mother's relaxed demeanor, the figure wore dark clothing and seemed poised in a threatening stance, arms raised as if holding something above their head. Even more disturbing was the raw terror captured in the boy's eyes. While his face maintained that mechanical, polite smile for the camera, his gaze told a different story: fear, helplessness, and a silent plea. The contrast between his outward expression and the horror reflected in his pupils was haunting, suggesting that something terrible had been happening just beyond the frame. Eleanor had analyzed thousands of photographs over her career, from crime scene documentation to historical images of traumatic events. Yet she had never encountered anything like this. The technical precision required to capture such a reflection in 1933 was remarkable, but what it revealed was far more chilling. This was not just a family portrait. It was evidence perhaps of something sinister taking place during what should have been a simple mother and son photograph. Determined to uncover the truth, Eleanor began investigating the photograph's origins. She needed to know who this family was, what had happened to them, and whether the horrifying scene glimpsed in the boy's eyes was real or merely an optical illusion of Depression-era photography. Her search led her to Millicent Thornberry's family records, carefully preserved in cedar chests throughout the shadowed Victorian mansion. Through meticulously preserved family documents, birth certificates, and genealogical charts, Eleanor discovered the boy in the photograph was Jonathan Thornberry Millicent's older child, who would have been 8 years old in 1933. The woman beside him was their mother, Catherine Thornberry, a widowed seamstress struggling to support her 2 children amidst the harsh realities of the Great Depression. According to family records, Jonathan had vanished mysteriously in November of that same year, mere weeks after this photograph was taken. A yellowed police report tucked among Catherine's personal papers indicated that the boy had disappeared without a trace from their backyard while playing after school. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no ransom demands. He simply vanished, leaving behind only grief-stricken parents and a flood of unanswered questions. Among Catherine's papers, Eleanor found a series of letters addressed to relatives in Boston, revealing her growing anxiety over Jonathan's behavior in the weeks preceding his disappearance. Jonathan has been acting strangely, one letter from October 1933 read. He refuses to play outside alone and insists that someone is watching our house. He draws pictures of a dark man who he claims stands in our yard at night. The doctor says it's his imagination, but I can't help wondering if something terrible is happening that I don't understand. Another letter written just days before Jonathan vanished contained a more ominous note. I found Jonathan hiding in his bedroom closet yesterday, crying and claiming that the dark man was taking pictures of him. He begged me not to let anyone photograph him anymore, but I could not understand why such a normal activity would frighten him so terribly. I am scheduling another appointment with Dr. Morrison to discuss his increasingly erratic behavior. Eleanor realized she was staring at more than a mysterious family photograph. She was witnessing what could be the last desperate cries of a child, a silent plea captured in his terrified eyes, hinting at the danger he faced. Her research led her to the Salem Historical Society, where she hoped to identify the photographer responsible for the Thornberry portrait. A small embossed mark on the back of the photograph revealed it had been taken by H. Morrison Photography Studio, a name that immediately drew her attention, matching the doctor Catherine had mentioned in her letters. Records revealed that Harold Morrison had operated both a photography studio and a medical practice from 1930 to 1934. Though unusual dual professions were not unheard of during the Depression, when many had to take on multiple roles to survive. Yet, as Eleanor dug deeper, Morrison's background revealed increasingly troubling details. Local newspaper archives from 1934 described complaints from parents about Dr. Morrison's unusual interest in photographing children during routine medical exams. He insisted on portraits supposedly for medical documentation, which often unnerved both children and parents. Several families had requested transfers to other physicians after these unsettling experiences. One article from the Salem Evening News, March 1934, bore the headline, "Local Physician Under Investigation for Unusual Practices." It detailed reports of Morrison making house calls to photograph children who weren't even his patients, claiming he was conducting a sociological study of childhood development during the Depression. Most chillingly, Eleanor discovered that Morrison had abruptly closed both his medical practice and photography studio in late November 1933, the exact period when Jonathan Thornberry disappeared. City records indicated Morrison left Salem, suddenly supposedly moving to California for his health, yet no forwarding address was ever provided. Eleanor began to realize the frightening truth. She was uncovering evidence of a predator who had used his respected positions as both doctor and photographer to gain access to vulnerable children during one of America's most desperate times, when families struggling for survival might overlook suspicious behavior in exchange for free medical care or affordable photography. Her investigation widened as she searched for other missing children in Salem and surrounding Massachusetts communities during the early 1930s. Working through police archives and newspaper morgues, she discovered a disturbing pattern that had apparently escaped authorities during the Depression, when resources for missing persons investigations were scarce. Between 1931 and 1934, at least 7 children aged 6 to 10 vanished from towns within a 50-mile radius of Salem. Each case shared eerily similar characteristics. The children had vanished without a single witness. Their families, already struggling to survive the harsh realities of the Depression, often mentioned in hushed tones that the children had been photographed in the weeks before their disappearances by traveling photographers or by local doctors offering their services in exchange for trust and gratitude. Eleanor uncovered a case file from Marblehead documenting the disappearance of 8-year-old Timothy Walsh in September 1932. His mother had told the police that a kindly doctor had visited their home offering free medical examinations and photographs for the children of the neighborhood. Timothy had been reluctant to participate, whispering that the man took pictures with his eyes, yet the family, desperate for medical care during their financial hardship, had reluctantly agreed. Another case from nearby Beverly involved 9-year-old Sarah Patterson, who disappeared in June 1933 after what her parents believed was a routine medical checkup from a traveling physician offering discounted services to struggling families. Sarah's younger sister later told investigators that Sarah had been frightened of the picture man and had drawn disturbing sketches of a dark figure with a camera that stole children. Most chilling of all, Eleanor discovered a diary entry from Margaret Collins, mother of 7-year-old Peter Collins, who vanished from Gloucester in August 1933. Margaret had written, "Peter begged me not to let the doctor take any more pictures of him. He said, 'The man's camera steals children's souls and makes them disappear forever.' I thought it was childish superstition, but now I wonder if Peter somehow understood something I couldn't see." Elena began to see a horrifying pattern emerge. She was tracing the work of a serial predator who had systematically targeted vulnerable Depression-era families, using photography and medical examinations as methods to identify and abduct children across eastern Massachusetts. The terror captured in Jonathan Thornberry's eyes might represent his final awareness, the fleeting moment before he became another victim in this grim sequence. Armed with this unsettling information, Eleanor contacted the current Salem police, hoping to share her findings and explore the potential connection between Harold Morrison and multiple child disappearances in the 1930s. Detective Sarah Murphy, a specialist in cold cases, agreed to accompany Elena to Morrison's former photography studio. The building had since been converted into apartments, but the original basement, where Morrison had once worked, remained intact. The current owner, intrigued by the historical investigation, granted them access with metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar. Borrowed from the state police, Elena and Detective Murphy began a careful, methodical search of the underground space sealed off for decades. Behind a false wall constructed with newer bricks that clearly didn't match the building's 1920s construction, they discovered a hidden room entirely concealed from tenants and renovation crews. Inside, they found photography equipment from the 1930s cameras, lighting apparatus, chemical processing materials abandoned for nearly 90 years. But it was the contents of the room that made Elena's blood run cold. Hundreds of photographs depicted children, some she recognized from her research on missing persons, others who had never been reported missing. Each image captured fear, distress, and sheer terror. It was clear Morrison had been meticulously documenting his crimes through photography. Among the images were multiple photographs of Jonathan Thornberry, taken in this very basement, showing the progression of his terror as Morrison's intentions became horrifyingly apparent. The final photograph in the series matched exactly what had been reflected in Jonathan's eyes in the family portrait. Morrison standing behind the camera, a rope raised in his hands, poised to commit an unthinkable act. Elena also discovered a detailed journal in which Morrison had documented his methods, how he used family portraits to identify vulnerable children, how he studied their reactions to determine whom he could ultimately abduct. Each entry offered a chilling glimpse into a mind that had turned photography, trust, and innocence into tools for a monstrous purpose. The basement room was more than a crime scene. It was the nerve center of a systematic operation that had gone undetected during one of America's darkest economic periods. Detective Murphy immediately called in a full forensic investigation team. While Elena realized something profound, Jonathan's eyes had been trying to communicate the truth for nearly 90 years, serving as silent witnesses to crimes that were finally being uncovered. Analysis of Morrison's journal by the forensic team revealed the meticulous mind of a calculating predator. Written in precise medical handwriting, the entries spanned from 1930 to 1933 and detailed a systematic approach to identifying, targeting, and ultimately murdering children across eastern Massachusetts during the depths of the Great Depression. Morrison documented how he deliberately exploited families' economic desperation, offering free medical services and discounted photography sessions to gain access to vulnerable children. Families were so grateful for any assistance during these difficult times. One entry read, "They rarely question a doctor's motives, and their desperation makes them overlook unusual requests or behaviors that might otherwise raise suspicions." The journal described psychological manipulation techniques, explaining how Morrison used photography sessions to identify children least likely to resist or report his advances. He specifically targeted children from broken homes, families whose parents worked multiple jobs, or those socially isolated by economic hardship. "The camera reveals truths that parents cannot see," he wrote. "A child's eyes reflect their vulnerability, their fear, their capacity for silence. Most chilling were his accounts of the final photography sessions with victims, including Jonathan Thornberry. Morrison wrote, "The boy understood what was happening during our last portrait session. His eyes showed complete awareness of his fate, yet he remained frozen, unable to speak or flee. The camera captured his final moments of hope, transforming into resignation. These images represent the perfect documentation of human terror." Elena discovered that Morrison had planned to expand his operation, naming potential targets in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Yet his entries abruptly ended in November 1933, suggesting something had forced him to flee Salem unexpectedly. The final entry was particularly ominous. "The Thornberry boy's disappearance has attracted more attention than anticipated. Several families are asking questions about my photography methods. It may be necessary to relocate operations before suspicions develop into formal investigations." Detective Murphy realized they were reading the confessions of a serial killer who had operated undetected for years, exploiting a respected professional status to commit unspeakable crimes against the most vulnerable during America's greatest economic crisis. Authorities across the country were contacted to investigate Morrison's claim of relocating to California in late 1933. The FBI's historical crime database revealed a chilling continuation of Morrison's pattern. In Los Angeles, records indicated that a Dr. Henry Mand had established a medical practice in 1934, offering services to migrant families displaced by the Dust Bowl. The physical description, medical credentials, and photography interests aligned perfectly with Morrison, suggesting he had simply changed his name and moved to an area where desperate families would not question unusual medical practices. Between 1934 and 1937, at least 12 children from migrant worker families disappeared from agricultural communities throughout California's Central Valley. Local authorities attributed the cases to families frequently moving in search of work, but the FBI's analysis revealed the same horrifying pattern Elena had identified in Massachusetts: children vanishing after contact with a doctor who photographed them during medical examinations. The investigation eventually uncovered Morrison's final known whereabouts in 1938, when he appeared to be operating under the name Dr. Martin Morrison in a small farming community near Bakersfield, California. According to witness testimony collected by FBI agents, Morrison had been confronted by a group of migrant workers who suspected his involvement in the recent disappearances of children. Rather than face potential vigilante justice, he had fled into the desert during a sandstorm and was never seen again. Elena collaborated with federal investigators to analyze hundreds of photographs that had been discovered buried in a cache on property he had rented in California. The images provided damning evidence linking Morrison to missing children across multiple states, revealing a killing spree that had lasted nearly a decade and claimed potentially dozens of young lives. Forensic analysis confirmed that he had been using advanced photography techniques to document the psychological trauma of his victims, essentially creating a horrifying catalogue of human suffering. The reflection in Jonathan Thornberry's eyes represented only one moment within a systematic campaign of terror preying upon America's most vulnerable families during one of its darkest economic periods. The FBI officially classified Morrison as one of America's first documented serial killers to exploit professional credentials and economic desperation to facilitate his crimes. operating across state lines at a time when communication between law enforcement agencies was limited and missing persons investigations were poorly resourced. Morrison had gone undetected for years. Eleanor's discovery prompted a comprehensive federal investigation, reopening dozens of missing children cases from the 1930s. The FBI established a special task force to identify Morrison's victims and provide closure to families who had spent decades wondering about their lost children. Working with genealogists and historical researchers, investigators contacted surviving relatives, including elderly siblings and other family members of the missing. For many, Eleanor's findings represented the first concrete answers after nearly 90 years of grief and uncertainty. Millicent Thornberry. Jonathan's younger sister, who had been only 5 when her brother disappeared, was still alive at 92, living in a nursing home in Portland, Maine. When Eleanor and Detective Murphy visited her to share their findings, Millicent's reaction was a mixture of profound sorrow and unexpected relief. "I always knew something terrible had happened to Jonathan," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "He tried to warn Mother about the dark man, but adults didn't listen to children's fears back then. At least, now we know he was trying to protect himself and warn us about the danger." Eleanor collaborated with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to create a comprehensive database documenting Morrison's crimes and identifying his victims across multiple states. The project resulted in the positive identification of over 30 missing children from the 1930s, providing long-awaited closure to families who had maintained hope that their loved ones might still be alive. The investigation also led to reforms in how law enforcement shares missing persons information across state lines, ensuring that patterns like Morrison's systematic predation could be detected more quickly in the modern era. Eleanor's discovery demonstrated the power of advanced forensic photography techniques to reveal evidence hidden in plain sight for nearly a century. Most importantly, Jonathan Thornberry's photograph became a symbol of children's resilience and their capacity to communicate danger even when adults failed to recognize it. The terror in his eyes had finally found its voice, ensuring that Morrison's victims would be remembered and honored rather than forgotten by history. Her groundbreaking work fundamentally changed how forensic investigators approach historical missing persons cases, showing that modern digital enhancement techniques could uncover what had remained invisible for decades in seemingly ordinary family photographs. Jonathan's story resonated beyond law enforcement, inspiring child advocacy organizations to teach adults to recognize subtle signs of distress that children often communicate through expressions and behavior. Eleanor also established the Jonathan Thornberry Foundation, dedicated to training law enforcement officers, social workers, and educators to recognize predatory behavior and take children's safety concerns seriously. The Foundation's work has prevented countless potential tragedies by helping adults trust and respond to children's instincts. Millicent lived to see her brother's story told and his memory honored through Eleanor's work. Before her death at 94, she often spoke about how Jonathan's eyes had finally been able to tell their story, bringing justice not only to him, but to all of Morrison's victims silenced and forgotten for so long. The photograph that once seemed a simple Depression-era family portrait had become a powerful testament to the truths hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with skill and determination to reveal them. For nearly 90 years, Jonathan's eyes had been speaking. And when Eleanor finally listened, they helped ensure that dozens of forgotten children could finally rest in peace. In the end, Jonathan's terror had been transformed into triumph. His silent screams had become a voice for justice, and his reflection illuminated one of America's darkest chapters, while preventing future tragedies through increased awareness and vigilance.